Let's talk about some of your clients. Like the China Communications Construction Company. This is a firm that is blacklisted by the United States government. This is a state-owned enterprise that is responsible for building artificial islands in the South China Sea, probably in direct contravention of international law, certainly in direct contravention to United States security interests. You helped them develop their 5-year plan. Why is that a good idea?
Senator, our work in China overwhelmingly works with multinational companies, including many of those being U.S. And private sector.
No, actually, you've advised 22 of the 100 biggest state-owned companies in China. That's according to the New York Times. Let's talk about another one, the Chinese Ocean Shipping Company. That's a state-owned conglomerate that's played a key role in China's naval expansion. I'm quoting from NBC News here. And Beijing's bid to extend its global reach. This company has been given special status by the CCP and forms the core of China's defense industrial base. This company has provided logistical support to the Chinese Navy's escort operations in the Gulf of Aden, and experts say, I'm still quoting, it serves as the maritime logistical arm for the People's Liberation Army. You're advising them. How much money did you make on that contract?
No, Senator, we're not advising them. Neither.
Did you ever advise them?
Historically, we advised on none of the topics that you had highlighted.
You didn't advise the Chinese Ocean Shipping Company?
Not on the topics you described, Senator.
Why is it a good idea to advise them at all? They're a state-owned enterprise engaged in activity directly contrary to the security interests of this nation.
They are no longer a client of ours, sir.
Why did you advise on 22 of the 100 biggest Chinese state-owned enterprises?
That number I don't believe is accurate, Senator.
It doesn't have anything to do with money, does it? In 2021, you made more than $850 million in consulting work for the federal government with the Department of Defense as your top client. When you bid for those government contracts, did you disclose your work for these Chinese state-owned enterprises that were conducting activity adverse to our national security? Did you disclose it to the Department of Defense?
Senator, we take OCI incredibly seriously, and have even gone beyond what is required around disclosures.
So that's a yes?
We take it incredibly seriously. We made all appropriate disclosures, Senator. I'm happy to come back to you on any details specific to the work that we do on the Department of Defense.
That is not what news reports have found and news agencies who've looked into this. In fact, to quote NBC News again, in bidding on contracts with the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, Customs and Border Protection, you did not disclose your work with Chinese enterprises in apparent conflict of interest. A report in 2021 showed, December 2021, that you admitted to providing services only for provincial and local governments in China, but not for the central government in China. My question is, why should you be able to get any contracts in the United States government? If you're going to advise foreign nations who are hostile to us and make gobs of money off of them, why should you be getting U.S. government contracts?
Senator, we've never worked with the Chinese Communist Party or the central government in China, to the best of my knowledge.
You're working with state-owned enterprises. China's not a democracy. They own these companies. These companies are doing the bidding of the Chinese military, and you're making money off of it, hand over fist. That's the problem. You make gobs of money off of our enemies, and then you turn around and you make gobs of money off of us. It's outrageous, frankly. Listen, you shouldn't be doing any work with the Chinese Communist Party and any enterprise that they own or have some share in. You shouldn't. And if you were serious about ethics, you wouldn't be doing it. But it's particularly outrageous that you then make money, almost $1 billion in a year, off the United States government, including the Defense Department.
Today, 65% of U.S. trade is covered exclusively by WTO rules rather than any rules from our free trade agreements. Our farmers, ranchers, small businesses, and workers need strict enforcement of these rules to export competitively. Yet, the WTO is not without challenges. Negotiations for new trade agreements have stalled as a handful of spoiler countries veto progress on new ag market access or trade in environmental goods. Judicial activism by the WTO's appellate body has undermined confidence in the organization and degraded the ability of the U.S. to hold China accountable for its unfair practices. Many countries, especially China, either do not play by certain rules such as those requiring notification of subsidies, or in other cases engage in predatory, unfair, and anti-free market behavior outside the scope of the WTO's rules. All of these challenges come at a cost to American farmers, workers, and small businesses.
The WTO is in serious trouble, and when it comes to the upcoming ministerial, there is very little, if anything, on the agenda that will advance U.S. interests. Following World War II, it was the United States and other democratic nations that spent decades building a rules-based global trading system centered around the principles of non-discrimination, whereby participating countries that played by the rules were rewarded with lower barriers to trade in one another's markets. But the WTO in its current form is no longer capable of advancing mutually beneficial concessions or developing new rules that further facilitate trade, address new challenges, and deal with China's unfair trade practices. As of today, the WTO's negotiating function, its primary and key function, is effectively paralyzed. The WTO's last major negotiating round collapsed in 2011. While some negotiations still continued, most of these focused on narrow technical issues, only involved a subset of the membership, or simply lacked ambition. In fact, the agenda for the upcoming ministerial demonstrates how limited the role of the WTO has actually become in advancing new trade rules relevant for today's global challenges.
A lot of our audience, very smart, probably the smartest audience out there, may not fully comprehend how big Country Garden and Evergrande are or were. They're not household names here. $500 billion in debt is probably, and I'm going to guess, more debt than the entire Dow 30 has combined, something like that. China's economy, to your point, has really been about one thing, and that is real estate. It is not low-cost exports. Sure, they make a lot of money in that too, but real estate, trading off it, flipping it, I mean, it all sounds very familiar to something you're very familiar with, 2007 in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, the leverage in their system is about 3.5 times or 350% greater than the leverage in our system was. And we've been at capital markets for well over 150 years, and look at how bad we screwed it up. The architecture, the basic architecture of the Chinese economy is broken. And it's broken because it was real estate centric. And 70% of Chinese individual assets are in real estate. And real estate's down, we don't know what the number is, nobody knows. Down 25, 30, 40%. And the banking system has, 30, 40% exposure and 3.5 times more leverage. So you can do all this math and realize China's in real trouble. Xi Jinping announced over the weekend that he wants to make talking about China's economy in a negative way, a national security issue. So he started wiping websites clean of negative economic data about China. I mean, when you start pointing at short sellers and eliminating data online, you know how bad it is over there. And he's in a real trouble. And back to comparing 500 billion and trying to understand the size. In the global financial crisis, the U.S. banking system lost about $800 billion, and we re-equitized it with common and preferred securities, injections of capital. We're talking about $500 billion worth of losses, or almost that much, in 2 companies. And all the rest of the developers in bankruptcy. And we haven't even talked about their banks yet. We're just talking about 2 companies losing $500 billion. Their local government marketplace, local government debt marketplace, is a $13 trillion equivalent marketplace. And they sell real estate to Chinese developers to pay their bills in the local government. Well, guess what? That's not happening either. And those local governments are all defaulting. It is quite literally, China had 20 plates spinning and all the plates are crashing right now.
現在の総統の蔡英文さん、やはりありがたいなと思ったのは、能登半島地震で、本当に被災地の方々はもちろんですが、日本全体が大きなショックを受けているときに、早々に、蔡英文総統が X にポストされましてね、とっても力強い、温かいメッセージをいただいて、また台湾の方々が日本のために、もう多額の寄付を集めてくださった。もう本当それには感謝をしなきゃいけないと思いますよ。台湾は日本にとって、やはりこの自由、民主主義、基本的人権、また法の支配といったこの基本的な価値観を共有する、極めて重要なパートナーで、素晴らしい友人なんですね。だから、とても嬉しくて、X にポストしました。
今、台湾の政治非常に話題になっていますが、どういったところが懸念事項になりますでしょうか。
特に中国と台湾をめぐる状況についてなんですが、日本政府の従来からの一貫した立場というのは、対話により平和的に解決されること、世界地域の平和安定に寄与することを期待しますというのが、日本政府の立場なんですね。私が懸念をしているのは、中国共産党政府が祖国統一、ということで、つまり台湾統一を掲げて、武力行使の選択肢を放棄していない旨の発信がございますよね。仮にこの一国二制度が崩れてですね、台湾が第二の香港になるようなことについては、非常に私は強く懸念をしています。
台湾が第二の香港になった場合、日本への影響はあるのでしょうか。
大いにあると思いますね。今の台湾には総統がおられ、で、立法院もありますね。だから、独自の法制度を持っておられるわけです。ただ、もしも、北京の共産党政府が、台湾のその法制度まで含めて、この台湾を統治するということになったら、台湾の方々や企業にも中国の法律 の適用が見込まれますので、これは経済安全保障上、非常に懸念しなきゃいけないことだと思っております。で、日本はもう皆様ご承知の通り、台湾のTSMC の工場誘致によって、半導体のサプライチェーンを強化しようとしています。でも、もしも中国の法律が、台湾の企業や、台湾出身の従業員の方々にまで及ぶということになると、重要技術の中国への流出ですとか、それからスパイ容疑で、日本人が逮捕されるようなリスクも考えられます。